Hello there, in this video I'm going to talk about agriculture and the real problems that China is facing in this industry, but also I believe this is the biggest booming industry in the next 10 years that China will experience because of their technology investment they're doing right now into the industry, the mindset change, the planning that's happening, and most important, the demand of the consumers that's completely different today. So welcome to this week's Pascal's China Lens on AgriTech and FoodTech. So a few weeks ago, at the age of 91 years old, Yuan Longping, he actually passed away. And he was the father of hybrid rice. And as a tribute, I wanted to make a movie about agriculture and food industry. Because Yuan Longping, he really changed the complete industry. He changed it because he created a new type of rice which increased the production or the yield with 20%, which means that 70 million more Chinese could actually get some food. I mean, amazing achievement, and this was back in the 70s. Now, this also had an influence globally because 20% of all the rice that we eat in the world has its origins with this invention. So Chinese definitely are inventors. They're doing innovation, we just don't always know about it. This is one great example. Now, if we think about food, there's a Chinese saying that goes, 民以食为天, and that means for the population, for people, food is like heaven. And if you've ever lived in China or went in China and those hosts, they give you some food, I mean, you know how great it is, these banquets. I mean, it's incredibly good food. And this is what I miss the most, not living in China right now and not being able to go to China because of course, the pandemic. So the food is fantastic, but it's really about the food being part of life every single day. And so if we think about food, China has really two parts. There's the north of China, which is a lot of grain or millet, and then the south, it's all about rice growing. And if you go back in history, for the past many centuries, millennia, actually China was an agriculture country with 90% of all the farmers or all the people that were farmers in China or involved in the agriculture industry. So it's a farming country. And at that time, due to Confucianism, Chinese farmers were looked at the most honest people in society. So it was a great job to have. And this is also why today there's a lot of respect towards farmers. But then in 1949, with Mao Zedong and the People's Republic of China that was established, things changed a little bit. Because before that, there was a lot of landlords who owned that farmland. And then people were working really hard to work the land. And then Mao Zedong, he really gave away all that land from all these landlords to all the peasants. And so everybody got his little plot of land. And that changed society completely. But it's very interesting to see because Mao Zedong originally also came from a farming background. So there's a lot of farmer mentality into China. So what does that mean to feeding the Chinese? Well, the problem is that, and there's a book about that is like 25 years old from Lester Brown, and that problem is that it says like China has only 7% of the arable land, but it has to feed almost 20% of the global's population. How do you do that? And you clearly see when you compare with America and Canada and Brazil and a lot of places, I mean, there's not very equal diversification of this arable land compared to the population living in these areas. So China and also India, they're kind of dependent on the rest of the world. Now, the difference between China and India is that Chinese are consuming much more food. And so what do you do? So this is something that is a real challenge for China. And so they've been struggling with this specifically since the 80s, where consumption went up because before that, it was a very different environment. What we remember before that, and even today sometimes, is this iron rice bowl. It's people wanting to work for state-owned enterprise. That was the symbol of this iron rice bowl, because they knew if they worked for a state-owned enterprise, they would always have this bowl of rice, and they would have food for themselves, for their family, for their kids. And so this was the mentality of China. But that has changed a lot since the opening up 40 years ago. And what we see is that now the consumption of, for example, meat is gone completely out of proportion compared to 40 years ago. In 40 years' time, China and Asia in general just went times 10 in consumption and production of meat for their population. While the rest of the world, the Western world, like US and Europe, it like doubled almost, but that's a big, big difference. So how are you going to feed 1.4 billion people with just this an increase in meat that is needed, but not the arable land to have the cows and the pigs roaming around? So this is going to be a challenge. It has been a challenge. What is China doing? Well, if you look at grains and you look at wheat, you look at rice, you look at corn, actually China over the past 10-15 years has really made sure that they are self-sufficient. 98% of all these grains are actually produced in China and is enough for the Chinese population. So no problem there. But it took lots of planning and lots of work, but they made sure they had that. But that is to feed the population, specifically people who eat rice and grain a lot. But people eat meat as well. And meat, that means animals, it means livestock, it means fish. All these things have to get fed as well. And so this livestock is getting fed by soybeans. And so every year, China imports more than 100 million tons of soybeans because they can't produce enough themselves. And so this comes from the US, it comes from Brazil and Argentina, mainly these three countries. And so that tells you a lot about this trade war, where China and Xi Jinping and Trump were fighting about this, and China wanted to import more, which they had to do in the trade war. That's not so good for Brazil and Argentina because they imported it from the US, but it tells you a little bit about their dependency towards the world. And so this created this tension over the past decade, specifically the last 5 years, which means that China has started to buy a lot of land. And there's a lot of land grab that we say in the West they've been doing, in Australia, in South America, in Africa, but also in Ukraine, where they leased the size of Belgium just to produce all the crops that they need. And so this is not just about China wanting to take a lot of land. This is really about if they don't do it, and suddenly the imports aren't happening anymore because of a geopolitical war, then they can't feed the 1.4 billion people. So it's kind of like an insurance towards the future. And this is how we have to look at it. But the most important is that besides getting land outside China, is that they're trying to elevate the industry themselves. And this is more about domestic investment. And the interesting thing is that companies like Alibaba, like Pinduoduo, like Meituan, a lot of companies, lately JD.com, they have been investing massively into the agriculture. And this is just 2 years old. And the reason they've been doing it is because if you look at e-commerce, I mean, 23% of all retail happens online already, but for agriculture, it's about 7%. So there's still a big growth margin. But getting vegetables, getting fruit to consumers is a much more complicated thing than getting a cell phone or a PC. And the reason is because there needs to be all these supply chain in the middle and cooling systems, and you need to look quality. And so it's really difficult, and there's many steps in the process. And so that means that today, Chinese tech companies are investing in that logistics, in those supply chain, to make sure that they can actually deliver it, because it's a new opportunity market for them. So this is what's changing. Now, if we look at China and the agriculture world and the food world, there are some really serious problems. First of all, most farmers have a very small plot. And this dates back from the Mao Zedong area. And they have like 2 football fields of size in plot. And that means that they don't invest a lot of money into it, because investing technology or innovation, it's not worth it. If you have like a big area, your machines that you buy actually go down in price, and so you can get the efficiency up. But a small plot, you just do it with the hands. It's not used to invest. On top of that, and I know that very well from 25 years ago, when I started my first job in fertilizers, is that Chinese were just dumping fertilizers into the ground. Really bad quality. It was just all about quantity and getting these crops to grow as quickly as possible. How it got into the ground and into the water and into the soil, they didn't care that much. And that mentality still today is with a lot of farmers like that, because they don't have time to worry about these things. They just need to survive by growing these crops. And so you see that this soil with the environmental problem today with China is now top of the agenda. But the farmers don't want to change as quickly. Now, on top of that, there's natural disasters with climate change, of course. There's also some cutting of trees and lots of problems that China has had with the environment in itself, which created a lot of rains and falls. I mean, this has been going on for centuries. But now this is really a problem when you have to feed so many people that want to eat better and higher quality food. There's an aging population problem in China. I made another video about that. But aging farmers is even a bigger problem than the aging population of China. Because the young kids from the farmers, their children and grandchildren, they don't want to become a farmer anymore. They want to live in the cities, have a great life, earn money there. So who's going to follow up on these farmers' kids and grandchildren? I mean, if they're not going to do the farming anymore. It's not sexy to be a farmer in China. And so that's a problem. And so on top of it, there's the food safety problem. And we've heard about it with the pandemic, but the reality is that there's so many links in between the farmer and the consumer, so many distribution channels, like 5, 6 times it goes from one company to another company, that if you find a quality problem, it's really hard to track it back, to trace it back to the origin, to the farmer, to the cow, to maybe the vegetables or the fruit. I mean, it's hard to figure it out. So something needs to be done, but it's like a place where it's easy for bad actors to actually do some bad things. On top of this, I think there's also another issue which has to do with getting technology and innovation and into the farmlands and into the agriculture. And that has to do with the international cooperation, where a lot of companies in the past have been, and still today, are innovating massively into agriculture. In Holland, for example, I mean, it's full of it, in Belgium, in many places. But it's not streaming towards China. And the main reason they didn't flow in China so much is because these farmers didn't care too much about innovation. They didn't care about these technologies. They just wanted to work their land. And if they got it, they basically were trying to get it cheap or get it quickly and steal from time to time. So they got a really bad reputation, China, about this industry, which means that a lot of companies in the fertilizer industry and other industries have decided not to invest too much into China because it's a dangerous place to invest. You could lose your technology, lose your innovation, and you don't really get the market. Why? Because the whole industry of agriculture is really built around policies. And so government is trying to push this industry very much, which means that foreign companies are often excluded from taking part into these tenders and policies and so on because they can't do anything about it. So a lot of companies in the West feel this is not very fair, and so a lot of them have not participated. And on top of that, China used to be a developing country, a poor country 40, 50 years ago, and so the world was helping China, but now very few countries and companies want to say, we're going to help China develop. No, now it's really, they're an economic power, let's deal now, and I want to have a fair deal. And so it's a lot of tensions happening. The other thing is about digital. And if there's one industry where the digital inclusion is still very, very low, it's in the rural areas. I mean, the only place where in China you find people that still don't have this smartphone, it's actually with the farmers. And so they still have to go into that digital future of China, where the cities are completely digitized, 3 years ahead of the West very often, but the farmers are not. And so all this combined creates a huge problem that China has to tackle. And so this is why I believe this is changing now. This is a high priority. Now, there's some good news as well. And one of the good news is that now it's not just driven by these farmers who just want to make money, but consumers are actually driving a better, higher quality of products. They want it faster, they want it better, and so they want to know where the products come from. And so what you see now is that this market is becoming a quality market. Food, agriculture, anything that has to relate it to health is becoming a consumer market. And so there's a lot of people in China that now want to eat plant-based meat. They want to be vegan or vegetarian, and it makes total sense because even 40 years ago meat was not on the menu very often, so they're kind of used to it. But due to the opening up, they became a meat-consuming country. But now it's like, yeah, let's look at health. And specifically with the pandemic, that changed a lot. A lot of organic in China. It's growing like crazy. And then with the live streaming, now they also feel they can reach out to these farmers, know who they are. They can themselves control somehow where the products come from. And so there's a direct connection between farmer and consumer. And I made a video last week about this consumer to manufacturing, which really shows how a company like Pinduoduo is making that direct link. which means that now Pinduoduo helps these farmers to send it directly to the consumers. You don't need all these steps in the between. And that means that the quality can actually be checked easier, and Pinduoduo is investing in that quality right now. So you have the companies that are investing, you have the consumers that are now demanding better quality and better products. So the farmers have to follow, specifically now with the 5-year plan of China, the 14th 5-year plan that just came out in March this year, is that you see that China's put new policies there to really digitize and innovate and put technology into this sector. So typically when we look at this kind of industry and you compare that with healthcare, with education, with mobility, what you see is that it's the same 3 factors available. The government gives the guideline, consumers are demanding, so they really want better products or better quality, and then there's the companies who see a market opportunity. And whenever you see these 3 things come together, which you now see in agriculture, you know the next 5 to 10 years is going to be a trend of investment and a change in mentality. So I'm very bullish on this market right now. Now, if you look at China, their mindset right now is on self-sufficiency, whether it's for microelectronics or for any type of technology, and that has to do a lot with the tensions with the US primarily, but also for seeds. There's now a seed war going on, and China wants to make sure that they have their own seeds to not be dependent on the seeds of the rest of the world. And that means cooperation will be more difficult, but it also means China's putting money into innovation and technology. And one of the other things that the government is now funding and subsidizing a lot is automation and robotization and machinery for, even if it's a small plot. And then sometimes these plots work together, these farmers work together, and they say, okay, buy 1 machine for 10, then you can actually use it together, and then it makes a lot of sense. Drones is used everywhere in agriculture now because China is the biggest drone producer in the world. The other thing is monitoring. And now more and more of these plants and greenhouses and even outside are getting monitored in real time. And many companies in artificial intelligence, Alibaba, Huawei and so on, they're actually helping these farmers to get more insights on how to grow their plants better, how to have better nutrition, less fertilizer or more optimized, so that they can improve or have less work for growing the same plants at a higher yield. It makes total sense. In the animal life, in the livestock life, there's actually real cool things happening. And this for me shows how the rest of food will also follow just a couple of years later. If you look in the livestock, what you see is that companies like Alibaba, Huawei, and also Ping An, the biggest insurance company in the world, have started to use face recognition, imagine, face recognition to track the health of pigs and cows and sheep. And so the whole idea here is an example of Ping An, which is the biggest insurance company in the world, and they're insuring these pigs for the farmers on one condition, that the farmer actually takes a picture of that pig when they buy the pig, and then every month or every 2 months they have to take another picture, and then Ping An, they can actually track this and tell the farmer how the pig is doing, their health, are they pregnant or not, is there a problem. And so when a pig dies, they actually know which pig died. And it's very important for an insurance company, because otherwise the farmer could claim a pig died, but it's actually another pig that died, maybe a pig that is not as valuable, but then get more money. And so there's a lot of scams happening, but now with face recognition, they know exactly which pig died. And on top of it, this company Ping An, which is also a bank, is now giving money to farmers to buy more pigs or cows, because they can track it, they can monitor, and they're getting better production of their livestock, which is a win-win for both. And so this is happening more and more. Now, on top of that, technology is getting embedded everywhere. It's a combination of blockchain, IoT, and AI. I already talked a little bit about AI with some monitoring and also with the face recognition as example. But when you look at blockchain, this is actually probably the most important technology when it comes to the food industry. And that has to do with the fact that you can trace everywhere where these products come from and what were the steps in between. And so blockchain is a very interesting technology, because they can actually make sure that whenever you buy something, you know where it comes from. And now IoT is included in that as well, Internet of Things. And as you can see from this picture on the chickens, well, the chickens actually, they have a sensor on their legs. And what that means is that you can actually track how these chickens behave every single day. I mean, this is hilarious. But what's interesting is that if you go into a store in Shanghai, for example, a Hema store or Fresh Hippo store, and you scan a QR code, you could actually see for that one particular chicken how many steps that chicken has made. If it did eat well, and how it behaved in health, you can figure out everything. But the steps will tell you if the chicken is healthy or not, because a chicken who does more steps than a chicken who does less steps actually probably is more healthy, and consumers will rather eat or buy that chicken. And so it's quite a weird situation, but we're getting to the micro level of tracking, micro level of monitoring to make sure that you get the best quality for the consumer. And the combination of blockchain, IoT and AI is really the golden triangle to help these agriculture industry, help these farmers to create better yield. On top of that, there's a lot of vertical farming happening in China. That has to do with the fact that now 63% of the Chinese live in the cities. And so if you live in the city, I mean, bringing these vegetables and this fruit to the cities, I mean, it takes time, there's risk, food safety issues, I mean, lots of problems. It's costly as well. So why not just build it into the city in a vertical farm? Maybe in a cellar or on a roof or wherever you want to do it, but it can be internal, inside a location, and just with specific lamps, LED kind of lamps, you can actually grow it much more efficient and much faster, and you can just go and get it next door. So vertical farming is something that a couple of years ago started off. In Belgium there's a great company, Urban Crops, doing that, and they actually are sending some of these designs and ideas to the rest of the world, and China is trying to lead as well in that industry. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. The other thing is precision agriculture. This is something that the West, and specifically in Europe and America, we've been very, very good at, to optimize really the amount of nutrition, the amount of water, the amount of temperature, the amount of environment, and which seeds to put where, and so on. This is what we know very. This has become a science in the West. And we're so optimized that we can almost not get the yield higher anymore, because it's the optimal yield. Compared to China, growing strawberries, for example, I mean, it's a big, big difference if you look at the results. But that has to go into China now. And we're seeing that now, little by little, this is getting introduced. It's still the early days, and I think it's one of the latest industry to transform, but I see the next 5 to 10 years a big, big transformation there. The question is, will the West be willing to share? If not, China will have to create their own innovation, and that's what they're going to do. Now, the other thing is gene editing, and a very controversial topic, genetic manipulation of food. And this is something that in the US is happening a lot. I think it's more than 30% of food is now GM or genetic manipulated. China has been very reluctant and very careful on going that direction. But with the problem of self-sufficiency and the fact that a lot of countries are not willing to give to China the food they need unless they pay higher taxes, and it's a part of a trade deal. So there's kind of like a little blackmail there, maybe on both sides, but the reality is they feel they need to do this themselves. So since this year, gene editing is really becoming a big thing in China. And so we see that China's putting a lot of effort on all these, what I call AgriFoodTech 2.0 technologies to elevate the whole industry. So a big change is happening. I believe there's a 5 to 10 year window now. A 5 to 10 year window for any foreign company to get into China and work with agriculture, AgriTech, FoodTech companies to build things together. Because the Chinese are really starting to fly into this industry. They're going very fast. What we've seen in healthcare, what we've seen in retail, what we've seen in mobility, it's happening now in agriculture. So the window is still early on, but there is only, I think, a 10-year window. If you want to do anything in that business in China and you wait 10 years, I don't think China will be needing any of these innovations in technology anymore. Now the problem is this is very difficult to do because there's Chinese policies which is mainly aimed at domestic support. So you'll need a partner. At the same time, the mindset of these farmers need to change, and it's hard to do as a foreign company. I mean, there's a lot of barriers. But I believe, just like we've seen in many industries, unless you get in now, it's going to be too late. So the choice is to any company in the West to either work with China or not work with China. But right now is the choice to be made. So the agriculture industry is going to make a transformation like never seen before in China. And as foreign companies, if we want to understand the industry, we shouldn't look at the problems. We actually should look at the opportunities. And the opportunities is really to work together with the Chinese and see China and the market not just as a market to sell to, but a market as a lab for the whole world. Because they're going to experiment and do things, and you can try it out on a big scale and then bring it worldwide. And that is the opportunity. And we only have 10 years to catch that opportunity. Hope you liked it. See you next week for another episode on Pascal's China Lens.